Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast, Season 2, helping pilgrims get ready for their first pilgrimage walk on the Camino, with your host, Camino guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. So many pilgrims, so many of my listeners are either on the Camino or getting ready to leave home to walk the Camino as this episode is releasing. I am in the latter category with my flight leaving the U.S. on May 9th, 2023. Hi, this is Nancy, and I have a confession to make. I am 2 weeks away from my travel date, and I have not booked a thing for Spain, except for my flight to Madrid. Nothing. No train ticket, no bus ticket, no first night hotel or guest house, nothing. This, by the way, is not normal for me, but it is the way many pilgrims approach getting started on the Camino. Just a warning, if you are walking in one of the busier times of the year, this approach could lead to higher prices for train and flight tickets, sold out trains, and booked out albergues and hotels. I should probably do some planning, especially since I am going in one of the busiest times of the year on the Camino Frances. Well, here's why I haven't done any planning yet. I have no idea what I will be doing once I get to Spain. Okay, that's not entirely true. I know I will be heading to the Camino Frances, and I know I will be visiting some of my favorite places. And I know I will be doing some research for an audio guide I'm working on for you. I will do some walking, but I'm not sure where yet. I am hoping to meet some of my listeners if the timing lines up and we are in the same place at the same time. I would love to meet you on the Camino. Here's how that can happen. If you join my email list, you will receive updates from the trail, and then you can let me know if you are close by and we can meet for a coffee or meal. And speaking of my email list, when you sign up, I will send you a copy of my Camino planning roadmap. And then about a week later, you will receive a copy of my top 10 Camino tips that don't usually show up on the top 10 lists. Then every week, I send out an email with more Camino tips and relevant information. And here's the important point. Much of what I share with my email list doesn't ever make it into this podcast. It's just for those on my list. To get on my email list and to get the Camino planning roadmap, check the show notes for the link. Or you can go to my website and right on the homepage you'll find a sign-up form. Go to thecaminoexperience.com and just scroll down the page until you get to the form. Easy. So back to my travel plans. Since I have already walked the Camino Frances many times, I don't feel compelled to walk a certain distance or certain parts. That frees me up to pick my favorites and to walk at a relaxed pace. Spring is my favorite time of year. Well, anywhere, and that is especially true on the Camino. Everything is green, 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 and the wildflowers are off the charts. The days are getting longer, and all services, albergues, bars, shops, are open. So, I will linger. I will sit on the terrace of my favorite Spanish bars, sipping café con leche for more hours than are strictly necessary. And I will be writing the script for the audio guide I mentioned earlier. I hope we meet up. Now, let's get to the good stuff. today's episode is another interview, this time with someone you have already met in a previous episode. Here we go. This is Nancy with the You on the Camino podcast. And this is an exciting morning for me coming live on this podcast because I'm back with somebody who we met a few weeks ago. And that is David Gutierrez, who I had the pleasure of meeting on the Camino last year. And David has come back from his Camino, I'm going to say it, on fire to make a difference in the world. And I want to get to the heart of what happened to this pilgrim while he was walking the Camino and when he got back. And I also mentioned that on February 11th, David was hosting a fundraiser for a charity in Ecuador. And it was a Camino-themed fundraiser. And I think you're going to love hearing about this. So let me say hello and welcome to David.
Hi, Nancy. Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I don't often have people back for a second episode, although I think I'm going to start doing that more because your story touched me so deeply and your enthusiasm and the way that you came at it. And when you shared with me what you had planned for this fundraiser, I was in tears. And I think that our listeners will really relate to the emotional impact that the Camino has for us. And maybe in sharing your story and talking about some of my experiences and what I've heard from other pilgrims, maybe we can start to shed some light on this mystery of not what is the pilgrimage, what is the Camino, this 500-mile walk across Spain, but what is the Camino in our heart and soul? That's what I'm after.
Well, it's interesting you say that because that's how I started my presentation at this fundraiser. It was a full regalia. It was 160 guests. It got sold out within a week or so since we put the tickets out. But the final part of it, after kind of a happy hour, after a full pilgrim meal, was my portion, which was a presentation. But it started with that exact question: what is the Camino? And after the presentation, it ended on the same question. And I think what people thought it was at the very beginning and what they felt and thought it was after the presentation was hopefully slightly different.
It sounded like it was. So let's do what I call put the pin in the map, which is you are in New Hampshire.
Yep. We're in Hampton, New Hampshire. I'm part of a Catholic church in Portsmouth, which is a beautiful seacoast town. New Hampshire has a very small coastline. It's only 22 miles long, and we're sandwiched in between Massachusetts to our south and then the huge state of Maine to our north. And right along the shoreline is Hampton and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And that's where I've lived off and on for the last 30 or 40 years.
So it's really no wonder that you had people willing to travel to your event because it sounds like you live in an amazing place.
It's wonderful. Our big joke is it's a secret. We want people to pass through the state of New Hampshire as quickly as possible. Go to Maine, go to Massachusetts, and just stop and buy souvenirs and gas in New Hampshire and then get moving. It's a small state, but within an hour we can be downtown Boston. We can certainly be on the ocean. We can be skiing up in the mountains. Yeah, we can experience 4 wonderful seasons all within a short drive of where you live in New Hampshire.
It's a great sales pitch. It really
Don't tell
is.
Me, just visit. Just visit.
Okay. Okay. I'll come to visit. So I mentioned that because you had 20 or so pilgrims come to your event who are not from New Hampshire. Where did they come from?
Well, they came from all over. And so the beauty of this, it really was a mustard seed of an idea. As soon as I got back, so many people, friends, family, parishioners, people I didn't know, but said, I heard you on the Camino. What's the Camino? And of course, you can't do it in 10 minutes. So I started thinking, I'll just have a little gathering, invite some people, and I'll use the church hall or the basement or something, and we'll have some people over. And out of that little tiny idea grew the 2 things I'm passionate about now in this stage of my life is obviously the Camino is one. And the other one is about 8 years ago, I was asked to be a translator on a mission down to Ecuador. And I met a beautiful Catholic nun named Sister Annie, who's from Brooklyn, New York. looks and talks like a Brooklyn, New York person, doesn't look like what you would think a nun was. But she had gone down as a young nun to Ecuador to be a teacher, and literally was stepping over people in the streets who had leprosy, and very quickly changed from being a teacher of young school kids to ministering to people who were dying and suffering severely from leprosy. And so I met her 25 years after she was down there, and she has a little clinic, and she's a living, breathing Mother Teresa. She truly is. If you have never met Mother Teresa, you have an opportunity to see a loving, living legend in Sister Annie Credidio. So bottom line is, those are my two passions. And this little mustard seed of an idea says, well, if I'm going to do a gathering, because as you know, Nancy, I'm part Japanese and part Mexican. I mean, you can't do anything without making it a fiesta.
Perfect. Yes, let's have a party.
Exactly. So it became, well, I just can't offer like coffee and tea and cookies. Let's make this a big deal. And then I asked 5 or 6 friends to help. We formed a little subcommittee, and within 6 months, it grew into this gala fundraiser event. We called it an evening on the Camino de Santiago. It was open to the public. We sold tickets, had sponsors who paid and donated money, and had tables. And God bless my wife, Lori, who's a decorator. She took on the theme and ran with it. And you've seen pictures. I'll share pictures with you, and you can share it any way you want. But this large modern dining hall had the look, feel, sound, and smell of the Camino. And I don't mean body odor. I mean, we had really good food catered.
Okay, see, when you said smell of the Camino, I immediately went to that smell in an albergue dorm room at about 8 o'clock in the evening after 30 pilgrims have come in with their sweaty clothes. They've all showered in the adjoining bathroom. So the steam has come into the room and turned it into a sweat sock smelling sauna.
Yep. Yeah, I thought that would get your attention. So it had everything.
I like your smell better.
It was wonderful. We had live music. We had volunteers who practiced every weekend for 6 weekends and sang Spanish songs in Spanish. So people walked up. They were greeted by greeters. They, of course, saw a big Camino shell and the yellow arrow, and they walked into the dining hall. And it's this big open-air dining hall, and they heard live Spanish music. And they immediately saw the yellows and reds and the Spanish flag and the Camino arrow and shell festooned everywhere. So
wow. So the greeters, though, and we haven't nailed this point. I want to make sure people understand the pilgrims who came from where? Where'd they come from to support you in this?
Well, so part of this little mustard seed idea was that there's no way I or you or anyone can tell the Camino story. I mean, it would take hours and hours, and no one has the time or patience, and people would walk away unfed, still
unsatisfied.
Mm-hmm. Unsatisfied, that's the right term. Thank you. So what ended up happening was to come up with, let's invite lots of pilgrims. People I had met on my Camino last year, people that are part of the APOC, American Pilgrims on the Camino, the organization that's throughout the U.S. They happen to have strong chapters in Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Vermont. So I invited all of their league presidents to invite their members to come up to this Camino fundraiser. And they knew it was a fundraiser. And they knew they were not going to be asked to be guest speakers or anything like that. But I had 21 people raise their hands, including 2 good Camino friends who flew in from Germany. They'd never been in the U.S. They stayed at our house. We had two representatives fly up from the Damien House in Ecuador. They stayed at our house. Are you getting the theme here? Our little tiny cape was flowing with pilgrims. My wife, who, God bless her, had heard about my Camino stories all throughout the Camino in the last year, saw within about 10 minutes what it was like for pilgrims to be with pilgrims. Instantly, everybody was sitting on the floor. Everybody had their shoes off. We had a fire in the fireplace. There was food and drinks going around. And even, these pilgrims didn't know each other. They just knew they were pilgrims and had been on different Caminos. And within, as you know, 10 minutes, she got to see and experience what the bond is like and the emotion is like when you're on a pilgrimage, when you're on the Camino and you meet someone. And these people, I'll be honest with you, other than a couple of them, if I crossed their path twice over the 35 days, that was a lot. And yet from that brief passing, it could have been lunch or dinner or a cup of café con leche. They all raised their hand and said, "We'll be there. We'll show up."
It's so interesting because we have these little micro interactions on the Camino, and the only thing we have in common is that we are on the Camino. And so there's got to be something so deep about the pilgrimage, because it's not just that we all carry a backpack, or we had to buy the right boots or sandals in your case, or whatever. And, it's not the physicality of the Camino. It's what it does to us on the inside, the emotional, spiritual connections, that even if we don't have that, because the Camino is that thread that binds us together.
Correct.
Ooh,
that is absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. 100%.
And you and I met just before Santo Domingo, as it had just started raining. How long did we walk and talk together? Maybe 30 minutes, 45?
Maybe, 30 minutes. And you mentioned the albergue I should stay at, that municipal one, which was very famous and old, and I love it. It's one of my favorites. It made one of the slides, one of the few pictures in my presentation.
Great.
And then we crossed paths again in Sahagún.
In Sahagún, yeah. And we got you set up with your halfway certificate,
which I wasn't even aware of until we bumped into it. And you said, "Oh, by the way, across the street, you can get your..." And we did. And then you told me which train to grab to get to Leon.
And what are the chances? I mean, this is what's so fun. And I think one of the things that pilgrims are just tickled by is, what are the chances? Here's this guy I saw, a week and a half ago. Yeah. And so we sat down and we talked, we got caught up, and you shared more of your story. I shared more of my story. We shared a drink. You got your certificate. I walked on, you got on a train. And then
here it is, almost a year later, we're
buddies.
Connected. Yeah, we're buddies, buddies. And, so I think that's part of the thread, or cosmic tumblers of the Camino. They click, and certain things click very well and open up. But I think, and part of my conversation during the presentation was that you have to be open to it. You have to go in with an open attitude. You have to be open to, and it has nothing to do with your spiritual being at the point in time. It has to be with, I'm going to do this, and whichever way I'm pulled or tugged, I'm going to go with it and see what it brings.
And I also want to say that it doesn't happen with everybody. I met hundreds of people, but I'm not talking to all of them a year after the Camino. So in terms of expectations, I think it is important to mention that it's a little bit like life. We meet people in life. You could strike up a conversation in line at the grocery store and find your new best friend.
Right.
Or then that whole sea of other people who are at the deli and the meat counter and the produce department who you would never talk to.
Right. And I think the other part is we never know what impact we have with other people. The two of the pilgrims that stayed with us, I said, flew in from Germany. They'd never been to the U.S. before. I didn't feel that strongly about the interaction. I didn't realize it, but it certainly had an effect on them. And when I reached out to them, we had a little Zoom meeting, and she said after that, yeah, definitely. Her husband encouraged her and her good friend to come to the U.S. and help with us. And whatever that urging was, it worked out.
We just don't know where things are going to go.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So let's go back to New Hampshire, to February 11th and the night of your event. Would you walk us through all the Camino themed elements and the journey? You actually created a journey for your guests. Would you share that with us?
Well, again, it just kind of grew. There were 5 or 6 of us, and everybody started latching onto these ideas. So we knew we'd have 160, which is the maximum that the dining hall can hold. So simple math said, well, if we do 20 tables, that's 8 guests per, and one of those guests will be a pilgrim. So again, part of the thinking early on was, let's have a pilgrim sitting down at each table with a guest so that they have a chance to talk to that pilgrim and ask them lots of questions during happy hour, which was beverages and tapas. And then during the meal, which was a pilgrim meal, it was paella, which is unheard of in New Hampshire. I had to go to a restaurant, believe it or not. I had to talk to the head chef, give him a recipe, which I don't know if he was happy for that or insulted by the fact that I had to show him this is, and a simple salad and a vegetable soup. So those were all some of the themes. Pilgrims are going to be there the minute the guests walk in the door. Live Spanish music, festooned in the colors of Spain, a pilgrim at every table. And because there were 20 tables, then it became very natural for the tables to be named after each of the villages and major cities on the Camino Frances, with number 1 table being Santiago de, or Saint Jean Pied de Port, and number 20, where a parish priest would sit, of course, would be Santiago, and all the villages in between, Roncesvalles and Zubiri and Pamplona. And again, the tables were decorated, and on each table was a small laminated card with a picture of and a little brief story or history of each of the cities or villages. And it just went on and on from there. There was also a Cruz de Ferro. One of the pilgrims who lived in New England loves metalwork, and he forged an exact replica of the cross, and he donated it to our parish, and it's sitting in our parish hall right now. But it's, of course, it's not the pole, but it's the cross itself, which is 16 inches by 40 inches, hand forged. And so that stood in the corner of the dining hall with a little bowl of stones and a little bio written about what the cruise was. And guests were invited to lay a stone at the cross. And of course, the pilgrims were telling the story. So this was, I call this an immersive event. This was not a rubber chicken meal with a 50-minute slideshow by your uncle talking about his vacation. This was an immersive, interactive event. And one last thing I will tell you, there were 15 pilgrims that could not attend. You were one of them. Mm-hmm. And so, again, came up with a little questionnaire that the pilgrims answered, and they were turned into these beautiful 3-foot by 2-foot posters, color posters with the picture of the pilgrim. You submitted one, and they were taped to the wall. And of course, there was a Camino arrow directing guests to go from one poster to another. And so they were hanging on the walls of the dining hall so that guests were encouraged to read the different pilgrim stories, number 1. And number 2, I think one of the really cool ideas was we had little credentials printed up with 20 slots on it. And at each of the 20 tables was a little stamp. And we encouraged guests to walk their own Camino within the dining hall, starting with table 1 and ending in table 20. And a lot of them did that. Wow. A lot of them loved it. And they went from table to table, putting the little stamp and sticker. So it really was, this mustard seed of an idea was just lifted up by the Spirit. And it grew into a highly successful event.
I love it. Well, and we'll talk about the success of the event too, because you have told me the outcome of the fundraising, and I want to make sure we talk about that. So then they had the meal, which mm-hmm. was a pilgrim style meal, which was served pilgrim style at the table. So it wasn't a single plated event and everybody got served by a waiter in a tux.
Right. You know, you can tell that I'm not hesitant to speak. So I was a master of ceremonies, had a microphone, and I would encourage people as a guest came in to follow, you know, all the different opportunities in front of them. When it came time to serve the meal, which was catered, I saw it arrive in the back of the dining hall, and I said, "You're about to enjoy a pilgrim meal, and it's going to be served as pilgrims. There's no buffet line, there's no servers, there's no waiters. The salad, soup, and the paella will be brought to the table." And it was presented in a way that each table it could feed 8 people. So that's how the caterer delivered it. And I said, "This is a Camino meal. It's all family style, you know. And if it's not very hot, then say thank you. If it's way too hot or too spicy, just say thank you. You don't have enough, but another table next to you has more, then you should go to the other table. If you want to talk to someone at a different table, then get up and squeeze a chair in. This is a Camino meal. For the next 45 minutes, you're a pilgrim in an albergue enjoying a meal. Just say thank you and enjoy it." And there was bread baskets and olive oils and olives and bread and paella and salad and all of that. So it was, people understood that. And I think they liked that. It was a breath of fresh air of sitting down and serving each other, getting up, asking for seconds from another table or sharing what extra they had with another table, so that everybody was felt very familial and communal.
Hmm. Well, one of the things that I always go to when people talk about the Camino and when they go back home and they miss being on the Camino, I'm going to bookend it. When people are getting ready to go to the Camino, they have these images of these shared pilgrim meals and they're like, that's what I want. Where are all the good shared pilgrim meals? And then when we get back, we're like, I miss the Camino. I want the Camino. What is it that we're missing? Well, I'm going to assert that it's not the pilgrim meal. It's what the pilgrim meal provides. So what is it about the pilgrim meal?
Well, and I'll be honest with you, being half Hispanic and having been on the Camino and lived, in Latin America, et cetera, to me, the meal was average.
Mm-hmm.
The paella from New Hampshire was, I hope the chef doesn't hear this, but everybody raved about it. I was shocked because I quietly took the pulse from a lot of people who I like and respect that were involved with this whole presentation, and those that were just pure guests that walked in with no idea what was going to happen. And every one of them said that the meal was one of the best tasting meals they've ever had. And it just goes to show you that how you enjoy the meal has somewhat to do with how the meal actually tastes, but it's way more about the comradeship. And that's why I can't think of a single bad meal I had on the Camino.
Isn't that something? Because I've had some truly terrible food on the Camino, and I'm a vegetarian. So there's an added hurdle there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. When you're with people who you're connecting with, who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's something about breaking bread and passing the bottle and passing the salad bowl and passing the bowl of bread. And one, again, you keep asking, one of the things I have to keep bragging about this. So, talk about chance meetings. I'm just chatting with someone out in public about 4 weeks before this happens. And I invite him and his wife to the Camino. He said, well, we can't come to that. We're booked that night, but I'd like to help. I said, well, that's nice. So he gives me his card. He's the commissioner of all the prisons in the state of Maine. He oversees all the prison system through the state of Maine. So a fairly senior position. And I'm chatting with him and he says, well, what can we do? We have a 60-person woodworking shop. Can we make something and donate it to you as part of the fundraiser? And I'm just thinking, I said, I have no idea. And he said, well, what about bowls for the bread? You've got 20 tables. I said, yes. So in 10 days' time, his carpentry shop turned out these beautiful wooden bowls. They're about 7 inches deep and about 15 inches wide. They're laminated wood, they're treated, and then they're burnished with a Camino shell. And it says,
gosh.
Oh
my gosh.
That was another chance Camino gift. And every table had the bread bowl on their table, and it had the Camino shell, and it was overflowing with bread. And that was what was passed around as people broke bread, drank a little sangria and some Spanish wine, and talked and talked. I had to cut them short. We allowed 45 minutes, and I said, we're going to be here till midnight, so we need to wrap it up. So the coup de grace on the meal was that's all cleared. They all cleared themselves. They, each person from the table kind of put it away, cleaned it all up. And God bless the ladies in our parish. We had 4 ladies that are accomplished bakers. And so the Santiago almond cake was recreated. It was beautiful. It had the dusted powder, Spanish cross on it, and it was absolutely perfect. There was one brought out to each table, of course. Each one, you could cut into 8 pieces. And people had coffee and tea and Spanish almond cake to finish off their pilgrim meal.
I love that cake. What you just told me, the woodworker and the bakers and all the people, what I conclude from that is that people just want to contribute and they want to participate. And that's what this provided.
Yes. Yeah. Again, other than the 20 pilgrims that showed up, everyone else had heard of it, maybe thought about it, had certainly had experience with me because we were parishioners or neighbors or friends, but they were just raising their hand to say, what can I do? And they would take a little idea and grow. The credencial was a woman that that has some really good AV skills or some graphic skills. And
Graphic
all of a sudden,
design.
and all of a sudden I've got this little fold out, a little credential. I said, holy smokes. She says, yeah, there's 20 slots for each of the villages. I said, okay, thank you.
See, we want to say yes to things. We really
Yes.
do. We really
Yes.
do.
Yep.
So share with us, please, if you would, the presentation. So just the general overview of it, the heart of it, and that ending that you came up with. I mean, what did they see at the end?
As it got close to the event and I saw how pitch perfect everything was, my wife and her team had decorated it perfectly. We had a tasting on the meal at the restaurant the week before, and it was coming out really good, at least according to the people on my group that were tasting it. And I'm sitting there saying, holy smokes, my presentation better get its act together. Because I thought about it, but I hadn't put a lot of thought into it. And of course, so many people, I quietly asked for opinions, and they were wonderful. They were giving me a lot of presentation ideas, lots of presentations. It's got to be this short. It's got to be this many slides. You got to do this. You got to hit these. And I have to admit, I don't remember a moment when it clicked, but when I looked at the finished presentation and kind of walked through it a few days beforehand, I realized this wasn't a presentation at all. What it was a story. And to look at it as a presentation would not do it justice. Mm-hmm. And no one that reads a good story, whether it's To Kill a Mockingbird or The Grapes of Wrath, sits there and complains, oh, it was way too long. Oh, it was too this. It just, oh my gosh, if it's a great story, you close the book and you want it to go on. And not that this was a great, but it totally freed up my ideas of this isn't a presentation. This is my story. And this is the Camino de Santiago. And so that's what it went. And it started with a simple slide that says, what is the Camino? Because the first 3 or 4 slides and minutes were answering the basic questions. What is it? Where is it? How long is it? How long does it take? When did you go? Why'd you do it? Et cetera, et cetera. And so the slides kind of walk through those basic things. But I laid the groundwork that the Camino, when it's done, if you're prepared for it, spiritually and physically and mentally, it said you do transform in those 3 stages of physical, emotional, and spiritual. And so when I showed a picture of Spain and the different provinces, La Rioja and then Navarre and then Galicia, I overlaid on that. Well, really, if allowed, and if you're lucky and fortunate, you'll go through these stages of the physical, emotional, and spiritual. And that's the seed that I planted. And then the story just kind of unfolded for there. It wasn't such a chronological story. I went here and then I here and, oh, here's a picture of somebody that something's funny that nobody would understand. It wasn't that. It was really kind of quietly amplifying and underscoring each of those 3 stages. Mm-hmm. And so I would pick and choose slides from different parts of the Camino because 99% of them wouldn't know that. Oh, that was before that. But it helped to amplify each of the stages, the physical, the emotional, and then the spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Yeah. It was well received, again, based on feedback and not to pat myself on the back, but it was comparable to the almond cake, the paella, and the decorations and the live music. So I think
something set the bar high and then everything else seemed to rise to meet it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those.
One of my favorite books of all time is called The Art of Pilgrimage by Phil Cousineau. He's a San Francisco author. And his book lays out the stages of pilgrimage, and the physical, emotional, spiritual is all part of it. He actually starts from when the longing begins for something more.
Yeah.
And then the pilgrimage calls to you all the way to the end. And when talking to you before your event, I was so dialed into what Phil Cousineau calls bringing back the boon. So the boon is the benefit. It's the benefit of what we come home with. And the pilgrimage experience for us is so significant. And we can remember, because we went at the pace of walking, we remember that tree and we remember the bar. We remember the conversation we had next to that particular signpost. Yeah. But as you describe, people who haven't been on the Camino are like, huh, what? But what Phil Cousineau says is that the story we bring back is the boon. So what you did in creating this event is you brought back the story And what he says is, tell what you have learned from your journey.
Right.
The signpost in the tree, I care because
Right.
I was there
Right.
another time under that tree.
Right.
But the gift that you brought back to these people in the room was your story and the lessons learned from the story, what you will never lose, even if you never go back to that tree.
Right. And that's exactly it. And quite honestly, it did reach a crescendo, which was what you'd expect. It'd be the last 20 kilometers and the wonderful pictures and the large crowds as you head into Santiago. And luckily, again, I was, there were so many cosmic tumblers, but I hadn't thought of it, but I had a small video as you enter under the archway and you hear the bagpiper. And I had a little video of that. So I kind of stopped talking and I said in the last 20 kilometers, the last few slides, I asked all the pilgrims to get up from the table. The lights went on in the dining hall and they all stood up beside me. So there's 21 of us and they all got a standing ovation as they all walked up and they all stood beside us. And then I quietly flicked through the slides with minimal commentary showing the archway and then the photos in the square. And then the Compostela, and then the Pilgrim Mass. Again, I was blessed to have a video, and they did the Botafogo. And then finally, the last few slides of kneeling at the tomb of St. James. Mm. But it ended up, like you said, the very last slide was the one I started the presentation, which is a beautiful countryside, and the question, what is the Camino de Santiago? And I have to tell you, I ended up by saying, this is it. You're looking at it. You just felt it in a very, very small way. The last 2.5 hours from the moment you walked in and throughout and looking up here at 20 people, some of us who know each other, some of us who don't, some have flown in from, again, Germany, Missouri, North Carolina, Maryland, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And posters from all over the world, from Israel, from Vancouver, British Columbia, from Seattle, Washington, from San Francisco, from Ireland, from Syria. This is the Camino. And I said that it's not what you wear. It's not which trail you walk. It's not whether you're in a hotel or a hostel. This is the Camino, right? You're looking at it. You had a small taste of it. You've had a small sense of feeling of what the Camino is. And that's how we ended.
I am so sorry that I wasn't there. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's true. I think for those who really get it and come back, and the boon is it's all the little memories and all the little things, but it's this growing sense of something special. Mm-hmm. Some people try, and then one of my questions for you is some people try and recreate it, and I kind of look at it like, well, you're trying to go back to college again, over and over and over again. Mm. There are some people that are, I think of the 21 pilgrims. Well over half of them have done it more than once, and I would say at least 4 of them have done it 6 to 8 times. And all, I would say half of them are ready to go back or are going back. They have active plans this year and next year to go back. So I get that.
What's with that? Why would they go back again and again?
I think it just touches and resonates something deeply with them. For me, quite honestly, I have a love of the Damien House, and I feel, and I answered the question honestly. Would I go back? I said, well, my Camino path leads me towards Ecuador right now. It's no different, and it's carrying the boon, and it's sharing with other people who happen to be less fortunate, but it gives me the same sense and feeling. Would I like to go back on the Francais? Oh, absolutely. I'd be there April 18th again.
Just why not?
Why not?
I'm going to share another quote from The Art of Pilgrimage, and the author quotes Joseph Campbell, who's very well known in the world of mythology and was also, as I understand it, a mentor to Phil Cousineau. And he says, the ultimate aim of the quest must be neither release nor ecstasy for oneself, but the wisdom and power to serve others. And isn't that just the heart of it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Because at the core of the Camino, it was the amazing willingness of people to help each other out, which doesn't mean money. It doesn't mean, oh, here's my sleeping bag. Oh, take the top bunk or bottom bunk. It's simply a heartfelt greeting. Hi, how are you? Buen Camino. It's sincere and deep. And so that's the connection with others.
And sometimes it's just acknowledging that, this is hard. And brother, I hear you. This is hard for me too. My feet hurt. I've got blisters. My knee, my hip, my back, I'm hungry. I haven't had, but to be able to really understand that we're all in this together and we're all seeking the same physical goal. Our goal is all to walk to Santiago. And we truly are all in this together. And I think the albergues are a really great place to dial into that as well, because you're sharing in pretty intimate space with oftentimes strangers. And we really are all in it together on this journey.
Right. Yeah. There's not a lot of artificiality to it. So I encouraged everybody. I said, if you really want to go on the pilgrimage, open yourself up to all of it, including the parts that make you anxious, scared, nervous, or uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Not unsafe, but in terms of uncomfortable, in terms of, I don't know if I could sleep with other people. I snore. I don't know if I like this food or whatever. And so right away, they make the Camino more like comfortable, the way it would be at home. I do this because it's more comfortable. I think part of the openness is push that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And also honor. For me, it was a journey to learn to honor myself, because the first 7 years I was returning to the Camino, I forced myself to stay in the albergues, in the shared dorms, and had very few good experiences, good, satisfying experiences. There were certainly times when I connected with other pilgrims, but for me, I connected on the trail and when we took a break and when we were walking. And so for me, the sleeping time was sacred time for me to have my privacy. And I think what we're really seeing in the conversation now is that people are finding that nice balance between connecting and camaraderie and honoring their own needs. And I think it's a really important transition. Or transformation.
Like
It's really good. Yeah. But bringing back that boon is such a personal thing. And I for me, it's been a long time question of, well, what is it that I want to bring back? And what is it that I'm missing so terribly? And can I have that in my everyday life? And so earlier, when you were talking about the pilgrim's meal and about how that it was almost like camaraderie in a box, like, oh, got the wine, got the bread, got the paella. Okay, we got camaraderie. And so I'm always interested to think about, what could pilgrims do when they come back from the Camino and they're missing it and they're longing and they're looking at their life and suddenly their lives look flat, or they look like beige wallpaper, just completely colorless. Well, that is one thing that we can do, is we can say, you know what, darn it, I'm just going to host a pilgrim's meal and everybody brings something and we're going to gather around the table and let's see what happens next. What else can people do, would you say?
Well, I think that's a big part of it. And I think giving and helping other people, just giving of yourself. It doesn't have to be Ecuador. It could be anywhere. It could be your neighbor. It could just be someone that you don't know that you could help out. And that's part of it. So, and that's part of what people are yearning for when they come back, is to reconnect with that general feeling of well-being and connected to other human beings, which you get from the other human beings. But I don't think a lot of people recognize that the path they're walking and the history that's seeping through them as they walk the same steps that a million other people have done. Part of my presentation showed on the spiritual aspect of it, whether you were spiritual or not, but to always pop into a local cathedral or church or chapel or anything. I said, take your shoes off, set your pack down, fall asleep if you want, but know that where you're sitting is typically hundreds of years old. A lot of people have done it before. It's been built by hand. A lot of pilgrims helped to build it because they had no money and they needed a place to stay and a meal to eat, and pitched in if they could. And that alone kind of seeps into your bones and into your psyche, and that just makes it very special.
It really truly is walking on holy ground. It really truly is. And then I think my personal thought is, when we can start to realize that every step wherever we are is holy ground, that's when the Camino's with us all the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the highlights for the guests was obviously the Cruz de Ferro.
Mm-hmm.
And when they see when they understand the story and the stones, and then they see the picture of the pole and the pile that's at its base, and that it's been there for, since 900 AD, it's like, wow. And every stone you step on is somebody's heartfelt tears or pain or thankfulness.
Yeah. It's really extraordinary.
It is. It really is.
I love metaphor and I love metaphysics and to look at all the meaning behind all of this. And some of it seems to be intrinsic meaning, and some of it we just add in. And so what? Let's add in whatever meaning supports us in our spiritual or personal growth and how we become more engaged and more connected to the world and to our neighbors and our families and friends. Yeah. It's really extraordinary. Right. So let's go back to Damien House and your fundraiser. How did you intend to measure success for this event?
Well, so it started like everything else, when you think about the Camino, how many miles is it? How many days is it? How much money am I going to spend on it? And so, well, how much are we going to raise? What's your bar, David? I mean, is it 8,000, 10,000, 20,000, 15,000? And again, it kind of migrated towards the end saying that the reality, my measure of success will be if we are able to bring several people closer to spirituality or to wanting to dedicate their lives to helping others. If the next Sister Annie's in the audience, or as you and I know, the friend of a relation that we bump into and talk about what happened tonight, and all of a sudden it helps connect them down the road, that would be the measure of success. Now, ultimately, I will tell you, with 160 guests, we brought in over $15,000.
Great.
And in Ecuador, and for the Damien House, I like to use the metaphor that, a dollar's worth $10 down there. So it was by all measures very successsul. It was very successful. And what's really interesting is many of the pilgrims now, including the two women from Germany, are going to look to do small fundraisers back in their neighborhoods, all towards the Damien House. And so just like the many trails on the Camino now, hopefully there'll be a lot more connections to help support this wonderful little clinic down in the middle of Guayaquil, Ecuador, helping people with leprosy. So
wonderful, really making a difference.
It makes a difference. It's well, like Mother Teresa said, right? It makes a difference to that one person.
It does. We might not change the entire world in one fell swoop, but one person's life touched is worth the effort.
It is.
I'm going to put the link for Damien House in the notes for this show. So if anybody would like to donate, because the event was on February 11th, but donations are accepted at all times. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, when I said 15,000, we actually had to cut the date off just because so many people were asking, well, how'd it go? How'd it go? Because actually more contributions were flowing in even yesterday and today, and will continue. So that's a good news.
That number will keep going up.
Right. Absolutely.
And what we know about these types of organizations is that they always need assistance. There's always room for another donation, no matter how big or small.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
I'm going to wrap this up with a question of, you mentioned that you're involved in a parish, a Catholic parish, and that is your chosen faith tradition. Some people listening might think, well, I'm not Catholic, so what would I do? So what advice would you have to the general world out there that would say, you know what, if you want to make a difference, here's a step. Right.
Well, I mean, do the Camino. So one of the posters, the last sentence by the Pilgrim, and I read that off to everybody, is, if more people walk the Camino, the world would be a better place. And number two, when you do walk it, forget about any kind of religious background. Just be totally open and hope for that spirit, like you said, walking on holy ground. You don't have to be religious to understand that millions of people doing what you're doing, carries a lot of weight and meant something to them. A lot of them died on the way. So take that with you. So yeah, it has very little to do with religion. It happens to be my driving force. But I'll be honest with you, I knew a lot of the pilgrims that were not religious, but they're very spiritual thanks to the Camino.
And could you have imagined, you said April 18th, April 17th, as you're getting ready to go to the airport, did you have any idea this is where you'd be?
No. And, I thank my dad. Like you said, we were talking about our dads before the show started. He instilled a love of the outdoors.
Mm.
since I was a little kid. So backpacking and camping and anything outdoors was always great. The Grand Canyon was always a second home to me. And so he planted that seed, when I'm 6 years old, and here I am 60 years later. And when I retired, the Camino, because of its outdoors and its challenge. So, I mean, it clicked. So that seed was planted way before. It wasn't just me. It was planted, and a lot of other seeds were planted that just happened to come to fruition. So
Yeah. So if you're thinking about it, go do it.
absolutely.
Yeah, just
Right.
go do it.
I think there is a definite need for people to go on the Camino. And then I think there's a definite need for those who've done the Camino to help find a way to retain, regain, and channel that spirit, to keep it kindled and grow it. And it doesn't have to be on the Camino again. It could be like we talked about.
Yeah.
The real Camino spirit is helping and connecting with other human beings in a good, positive way.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share, to wrap up, I'm going to share one more quote from The Art of Pilgrimage. I'm going to change it slightly to meet our needs here. A lot of people talk about the Camino as the journey and as the experience, and as Santiago, the destination, and that being the end of the pilgrimage. Many of us know that that is not the end, that's the beginning.
Right.
And then we return home and we go, huh?
Yeah.
What now? Well, what Phil Cousineau says in The Art of Pilgrimage is, imagine your return home as the next act of an epic story.
Oh, I like that.
So let's go live those stories, and let's see what we can do out in the world to make it even our neighborhood or our circle of friends or our communities or whatever.
Yeah.
And I know that for some people that could sound sort of idealistic or Pollyanna or pie in the sky. But what we've learned on the Camino, at least what I've learned, is that every interaction matters. And it can make a difference, or it can do damage, or something in between, and we have a choice.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Every interaction. I would never have imagined the people that showed up and contributed because of other interactions that either I'd forgotten or didn't think very much of, but it made a big difference to them. So
yeah. And often we just don't know what our words or our actions will start. Those seeds you just talked about, we don't know how or where the seed will grow. But the more seeds we put out there that could grow, the better chance. Yeah. David, thank you again for your time. I've really enjoyed this. I hope our listeners have enjoyed your story and will be inspired to go make a difference in their worlds.
Well, and thank you on behalf of Sister Annie and Damien House and myself. Thanks for everything, and putting their website on your blog would be outstanding. That would be helpful. You never know.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you.
All right.